Everybody. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, horror comics. I love horror comics, man. They're just, I can't explain it. I have a passion for them, and they're just great. Makes my mouth water thinking about them because I just love reading them. And so, anyway, we're going to talk about the rise and fall of horror comics. Now, the rise actually started happening somewhere around the 50s. Now, in the early 50s, it was still very, superheroes, and superheroes are okay, but in my opinion, they're not as good as horror. But anyway, superheroes, like Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, Green Arrow, the Flash, they were very much in style. They were very popular. And then a miracle happened. EC Comics' William Gaines discovered that, horror could also be an outlet in comics. And he wrote a scary story, and he put it out on the stands when they still put them in stands, newsstands, and they sold out. Kids loved it. Then they discovered that, kids liked horror, and horror quickly started replacing the superheroes. So kids were dropping superhero comics to pick up horror comics. And there were I love the comics back in the 50s and the 60s because they were all hand-drawn, hand-inked, hand-colored. They were very particular about what kind of press, those old presses, old printing presses. They're very particular about what kind of press they used. I don't like today's version of how they do comics. I'm sorry, I just don't like today's version. Computers ruin it. They do everything on computer, and they hand it on computer, color it on computer. It just doesn't look. I don't like it. So, that's just me. You had to be talented back in the day to do comics. Now you just have to have a computer. But just some beautiful, beautiful art from these horror comics that started popping up everywhere. After EC Comics started putting out Tales from the Crypt, The Vault of Horror. Oh, what was the other one? Tales from the Crypt, The Vault of Horror. There was another one, and it slips my mind for some stupid reason. But anyway, there was another title too. Anyway, and they had the Galunatics, which were the Vault Keeper, the Old Witch. There's another one, I can't remember his name. You know what, this is going to bother me if I don't look it up. But anyway, they started, every issue was just going out of, it was sold out within a couple of days, that it hit the stands. And, so yeah. Sorry guys, Okay, here we are. The Haunt of Fear was the other one. That was going to drive me insane. So yeah, The Haunt of Fear, The Vault of Horror, and Tales from the Crypt. Anyway, so that was the three mainstream put out by EC Comics. And, sorry, it's raining here, so anyway. And actually, that's what kind of got me in the mood to discuss horror comics today, because of the rain. And anyway, some of these just beautiful, beautiful comics. And it really doesn't tell any of the publishers. Today, like DC and Marvel, you know who they are. But back then, it didn't really tell the publishers much for some strange reason. I know Atlas did a horror comic. Astonishing Terror Tales in the Night. So, and actually some of them were pretty scary, so that was pretty cool. And then there was the Black Cat comic, not the superhero Black Cat, but it was just a horror comic about these really gruesome stories, and they were just great. I loved them. And actually, let me show you guys some of the covers on here. Hang on. Okay, here we go. Alright, so Here we have some of these. They're just absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. There you have Mystery. That's really cool. The artwork there. And then you had Weird Tales of the Future, which were always pretty creepy. And look at the artwork. It's just absolutely amazing. So there's Black Cat. And it's just beautiful, you know, how it was done. It took a real artwork to do comics back in the day. You know, you had to be really talented. And I think that's how it should still be today, but, you know, unfortunately, I guess other people don't agree with me. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of good talent in the industry today. Just not as, you know, this is beautiful. I mean, how could you compare with this? Look at that. You know, that's hand everything. That's beautiful. Haunted Thrills, you know, so, and I think that's the coolest one, actually. I love that cover. And actually, there's a band. I don't know if they know it or not. I think their name is Black Smoke or some kind of stuff like that. Their icon for their band is actually that guy, and I don't know if they know that or not, but that was just a coincidence or whatever. But anyway, some extremely beautiful comic work there, so just beautiful. And of course, unfortunately, let's discuss the fall of horror comics, and in my opinion, the fall of pretty much the golden age of comics. I know people say that's, you know, the silver age actually comes in the 60s, but this was, the horror comics were the golden age. And, you know, when they crashed, you know, they just, I don't know, you know, it was just, that was the end of the golden age for me, personally. But, unfortunately, what happened was, you had this lunatic, he was running for Senate, or he wanted to actually be president. He was running for a presidential campaign, and he wanted something to jump out off of. And his name was Keith Hoffer. And also, you had him teaming up with this psychiatrist that talked to these mentally disturbed patients who were probably put under this idea by him in the first place. He asked them what they read, and they said horror comics. A lot of them read horror comics because everybody did. It was the 50s, and that was the big thing. Mid-50s, and he got in his weird mind that was corrupting the youth. So apparently they thought that, you know, horror comics were corrupting the youth and all this. And unfortunately, the Congress went along with it. And unfortunately, a lot of parents went along with it too, because a lot of parents, adults at the time, didn't have a clue what comics were about. So unfortunately, they went along with it. Their kids couldn't buy comics anymore. They wouldn't let them buy comics. And then you had that horrible Code Comics Authority, which I hate. I'll never follow the Code Comics Authority. I'll never do it. Never. But anyway, they strictly limited comics. They destroyed a lot of comic publishers. There were a lot of publishers back then. There's very few left today because of that. And so they destroyed a lot of those publishers, and a lot of these publishers that were printing the horror comics I just showed you are gone. They went out of business, unfortunately, and those comics are so hard to find now because most of them were burned. So they did burn comics, so they were kind of like modern day 50s Nazis, you know. They got these horror comics together and some old Batman comics and Superman comics and put them in a pile and burned them. Breaks my heart to see that. I've seen the video where they burned these comics, some of them in the 50s, and it's heartbreaking because I'm just like, oh my God, what are you guys doing? So that was the fall of the horror comics, unfortunately. And in my opinion, horror comics, those horror comics especially, will always be the greatest of the golden age of comics. You know, and of course I like superhero comics too, but it takes a second compared to horror comics, in my opinion. So that's the rise and fall of horror comics, and you know, still today, actually, I was going to bring that up, I almost forgot. Today we don't see a lot of horror comics like that. We don't see them because that's still in the psyche of a lot of these, you know, publishers. They won't print horror comics because they remember what happened in the 50s. And of course you had the rebirth of Tales from the Crypt recently. Another publisher has put that out, and I thought that was pretty cool. But compared to the old Tales of the Crypt stories, and I'm not trying to put them down, I think it's really cool that they're trying to bring Tales from the Crypt back to life. But compared to the old stories, they're really soft. I mean, it's nothing compared to the good old stories of Tales from the Crypt. And that's another thing too. Any horror comics that come out today are really soft, really watered down. And I don't know. I'd like to see a return of, these old horror comics. I'd like to see that. And I want to see, bloody, nasty, the devil, tales. That would be really cool. And that's something you don't see a lot in today's comics, I mean, of course there's villains, but you don't see real evil. They don't portray evil at all. And there's hardly ever a story where evil wins. And it's refreshing to see evil win sometimes, because it realizes that, we have to fight for goodness even harder. If evil is allowed to win, if evil can win, if good men do nothing, then we have to fight for goodness even harder than before. But unfortunately, comic publishers today, they water these horror stories down, and I don't know. But I love horror comics, and I'd love to see a return of horror comics. I don't know, I'd like to see a poster or something of all these horror figures, all these logos, coming up out of hell and, crawling up out of hell, like You Think We Can Die or something like that at the bottom. But, or Did You Think We Were Dead? That would be pretty cool. But, anyway, long live comics, keep reading comics, and peace. I love you all. I love you all. Peace, and here's to a return of horror comics. Here's hoping.